Hey there, it's Jeff Henderson again here with Fleet Feet and Marathoners in Training. We're here with another installment of Ask the Experts. Today we're going to be talking about heart rate training, and we've got the good doctor, Dr. Darrin Bright. Darrin, thank you for being here with us again today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So we're going to talk about heart rate training, so let's just jump right in. Whether I'm at a Saturday workout or a Wednesday workout with MIT or even just around the store, I'll often hear an MITer talking to another one, and one might say, your heart rate hit what? Like, that's way too high. What do you have to say to, that just initial conversation some folks
Yeah,
might be having?
initial reaction. Well, I think first of all, understand that everybody's heart rate during a workout is going to vary depending on your age, and even just individual to individual. You could be the same age and have a different maximum heart rate, different heart rate training zones. So there's going to be a lot of individual variability. So you can't use one person's heart rate zones and say, oh well, I'll just use those. If you are trying to follow somebody else's schedule, it won't work that way. And then also we know there's some variability in heart rate monitors. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes the heart rate monitor isn't picking up accurately, and you might see a 250, and is that really accurate, or is it just that you need to replace the battery or work on the
Yeah.
contact of the strap against your
Yeah.
chest?
Well, loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
What is heart rate training, and why should someone consider
Sure.
following heart rate training?
Well, I think it's a great way to train. I can tell you my story. I was trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon for quite a few years. Kept pushing, thinking, oh, I just need to run harder. I need to run faster. I need to run longer. And was met with, a couple failures. Get to race day and would kind of bonk late in the run and didn't have the race that I wanted. It wasn't until I transitioned to heart rate based training that I was actually able to achieve the goal that I wanted. And basically, heart rate based training is using your own physiology to guide your treatment, as opposed to just following a certain pace group and running in that same group, same times all the time. Heart rate training individualizes it, and it really, we have the saying, train smarter, not harder. And so it's tailoring your workouts using your unique physiology to get the most out of it.
Perfect. You kind of answered this in the first question, but say just for a more practical application, somebody who's 32, 160 pounds, right around 5'4", during a hilly run, their average heart rate is 176, their max hit 201, low is 156. Should they be worried? Is that okay? What do you recommend about signs for slowing down based on, you know,
Sure.
beginner's knowledge of heart rate training?
Yeah. Well, roughly one estimate of a maximum heart rate is going to be 220 miles your age. So if you're 32 running at a maximum heart rate of 201, yeah, that might be a little bit harder than what we should be doing in a workout. However, again, we know everybody's heart rate zones are going to vary, and it is important that we try to define those zones. And one of the best ways to do that is through some physiologic testing called a VO2 Max test, where we define your individual heart rate zones. And so you can figure out what your tempo run should be at, what your interval workout should be at, what your recovery workout should be at, and most important, what your long run should be at. And then once you've done that testing, it's no longer, oh, should I be running 8-minute miles or 10-minute miles? It's no, I know I should be running my heart rate around 156. And that can really help to take a lot of the guesswork out of it. So just to say, is that too much for one person? It's hard to say without knowing their individual zones.
Yeah. So you mentioned some different ways to go about testing. What is your preferred method as far as accurately calculating heart rate
Yeah.
zones?
So we know for younger athletes, the 220 miles per age probably works pretty well. But as we age, we do know that that formula starts to fall off a little bit. There are a lot of people that maintain a high maximum heart rate, very late into life. And if you're sticking to the 220 miles per age, you may not be tailoring the workouts as best you can. So the best way is to do the VO2 max testing. Involves putting a mask over your face. Can sometimes be a little distressing, but you get used to it pretty quickly. And then we monitor your oxygen levels, we monitor your carbon dioxide levels, we hook you up to a heart rate monitor and take you through a hard workout. That workout takes about 8 to 12 minutes, and then you usually tap out, you take you to exhaustion, and then from that information we can gather all of your heart rate zones.
Yeah. I think it's really important to point that piece out, the tailoring your zones to your individual needs. I like to use the example of my brother and I. My brother's 4 years older than me. By definition, if you use any calculation, his max heart rate is going to be lower than mine. However, when we were both tested at pretty much the same time, his turned out to be about 10 beats higher than mine.
And then even individually, we think of, well, your heart rate, your max heart rate should drop 1 point a year. What I found first probably 10 years I did a VO2 max test, my heart rate didn't drop. And then suddenly it dropped 10 beats. And so sometimes we stay that stepping where you'll maintain a maximum heart rate, you'll maintain your zones for a while, then there'll be a big shift. And if you're not tailoring your workouts to those shifts, you might be undertraining or overtraining. It's hard to say.
That's an interesting question, and which poses another one that I've got. If given our audience, so a lot of folks that are training for a half marathon or a marathon for the first time, are they more or less likely to see that 1 beat per year drop, or is there?
It's again very individual, and it's going to be variable. One of the questions to that point that I do get is if it is somebody's first marathon, should they consider heart rate based training? And I think it can certainly help. One of the reasons I think about it is just to prevent overtraining, lower our risk for injury, so we can define those heart rate zones and make sure we're not pushing too hard.
Yeah.
Training within our zones is going to maximize your performance. It's also going to lower the risk for injury. My example that I gave when I've been trying year after year, what I found is I was overtraining. I was pushing too hard and putting myself at risk for injury.
Yeah.
Once I shifted down, it really didn't make sense to me. I actually run slower and I'm going to perform better, and that actually panned out.
Yeah. Well, once I've determined what my zones are, how can I best implement heart rate training into my own training?
Yeah. So once you've defined your zones, it does take a little bit of paradigm shift. We're no longer looking at our watch and trying to define what pace we're running. We're trying to find what's your heart rate. So the first thing is you're going to need to invest in a heart rate monitor. You're going to need to look at your heart rate while you're running. I find that instant heart rate is sometimes not the best. I'll kind of look at that average heart rate because if you go up a hill, your heart rate's going to go up, and then if you level off. So I kind of look at, over a course of a mile, what's my heart rate doing? And then you need to stick to the zones. If it's a recovery day, we need to be down in those recovery zones. When I first made that transition, I was kind of shocked that, there's about a 4-minute a mile difference from my hard days to my recovery days, and I really needed that. I needed to get that rest and recovery so that I got the benefit of the harder workouts.
You mentioned the time difference and, from a recovery day to a hard day. So if we're looking at any training schedule, marathoners in training, we have our schedules obviously built around the long run on Saturday. We have a recovery run built in. We have tempo runs, interval runs. Where should our zones be falling for these different types of workouts?
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing about the heart rate-based training and doing the VO2 max testing is you'll get a spreadsheet that basically says recovery zone, here it is, and it'll be a 10-beat range. And then it'll say, your long run zone, a 10-beat range. And then it'll go through each zone or intensity of training, and it will define that for you. Yep. So you basically just plug it into the schedule that's up on the MIT website, and it says, okay, long run day, now you know what your heart rate should be at on those days. And the other nice thing is when you get a day like Saturday where it's really hot, you shouldn't be maintaining that same pace. We should be looking at heart rate, and you might end up running a little bit slower.
Sure.
Same thing if you haven't gotten the rest that you need.
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna cheat your body. Your body's gonna say, "Hey, I need some extra recovery today," and it's gonna express itself through its heart rate.
If for one reason or another getting a VO2 max test isn't in the cards for somebody, and you figure out approximately what your maximum heart rate, how can you calculate where your zones then fall?
So there's some different formulas out there that you can kind of look on. I know Runner's World has some different formulas for defining those based off a percentage of your total or your maximum heart rate.
Yep.
So you can look at that and say, okay, I'm more in the beginner realm. I want to have what should my long run be based off of a calculated maximum heart rate. And you can roughly estimate it that way.
Okay.
There are also some workouts that you can find where people try to estimate that by doing like quarter repeats and trying to get that maximum heart rate. And so there's some different formulas out there that you can try.
Okay. If I've been told that my maximum heart rate is X, but my Garmin's telling me that I hit a maximum heart rate 10 beats higher, should I be worried about that, or is that more a function of the device probably?
Yeah, I think one thing is, a maximum heart rate is defined as what your heart rate will be during the VO2 max test, which is 8 to 12 minutes. Sometimes we'll see a little bit of drift of that, where someone's heart rate will go a little bit higher during a workout doesn't mean that their maximum heart rate's higher. It's just scientifically that's how we define a maximum heart rate, and sometimes it will get higher. Usually that has to do something with some dehydration, maybe not hydrating quite as well during a workout, so sometimes you'll see those higher numbers later in a high intensity workout. Sometimes the device, again, always think about the battery if it's been a while since you've changed it, and then also contact points. I know some people just struggle with getting reliable readings, and if that's the case, I might defer to the folks in the store. I know they are very knowledgeable about all of your heart rate monitoring devices and can give some guidance and suggestions on how to enhance that.
Great. What considerations should I take as it pertains to heart rate training and recovery?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is hitting those recovery workouts. For me, what I found the first time I transitioned over was my tempo days. I was about the right pace. My interval days, I was about the right pace. It was my recovery days that I was way off on. I thought, 15, 30 seconds a mile slower, that's recovery. But it really wasn't what I needed, and I needed to be a lot slower. So I think it's just that concept of embracing recovery and understanding that your body needs it to improve.
Where should my resting heart rate, loaded question I know, and should I be concerned if I've figured out what my resting heart rate should be and I wake up one day and it's maybe 10 beats higher?
Sure.
5 beats higher, whatever.
So I think the best way to find your resting heart rate is before you get out of bed in the morning, on a day you get to, not turn the alarm clock on. First thing you do is reach over and take your pulse. Either it's, your radial pulse or carotid pulse, and see what it is for a minute, or you can, do it for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. And that's really what your resting heart rate will be. If you find that your resting heart rate is slowly increasing, that's sometimes a sign of overtraining. So that would be one variable that we would look at in people who may be overtraining. So that would be the first thing I would think about. And normal heart rates, 60 to 100. So most people's resting heart rates are going to be somewhere in that range. Usually people who are conditioning a lot, we're going to be a little bit lower though on that end of the spectrum. So 60s, sometimes even 50s and 40s if you've been running for quite a while.
If I've been following heart rate training, how should I then apply that come race day? Whether that's a tune-up 5K or 10K, and then again on marathon day or half marathon day.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different theories on that. My personal theory is leave the heart rate monitor at home when you go race. Subconsciously, if you're running and you see those higher heart rates coming in, you realize you may not have that much time at that zone, and that may not be the case on race day. And so I think sometimes it can defeat you if you wear it on race day. So I usually say, leave it at home. You've done all of your training. You've hit your zones. You followed the schedule. Your training will get you where you want to be.
Perfect. And how often, if I decide to get a VO2 Max test, one, where can I do that? And how often should I consider getting retested?
Sure. So through MIT, there's some links up that talk about the VO2 Max testing. There's they do it at McConnell Heart Health Center, which is part of Ohio Health, and they have a special discount for the MITers. And that's probably the best place to do it, just because they are conditioned to the MIT program. They put the full report out, explain it, and it parallels perfectly with what you're putting up on the schedule for the training program. I usually recommend about every year or two is probably when you want to retest, because zones will shift and you want to make sure you're staying on top of it.
Excellent. Well, Darrin, you obviously with your work through Ohio Health, the Max Sports Endurance Academy, you're the director or medical director of the Columbus Marathon. What else, as it pertains to heart rate training, should folks consider?
Yeah, I think you hit most of the things. I think the biggest thing is just embracing it, believing in it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard when you first start some of those workouts, and it takes a little trial and error. Yeah. But if you have a heart rate monitor, you're already monitoring that. Take the next step and do the VO2 Max testing, because it's really going to sharpen the saw.
Excellent, Darrin. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Continue to tune in. We've got a whole lot more coming your way. Whether it's hydration and nutrition, we've got some dynamic warm-up videos coming. Whole gamut of stuff coming. Continue to tune in, and we'll see you out on the trails.